We need to address the pornography problem that's devastating our generation. That's what we're going to discuss in this video. I really see pornography as a spiritual nuclear bomb. Just like a nuclear explosion destroys everything and leaves lingering effects, pornography infiltrates our lives, damaging relationships far and wide. I personally began struggling with pornography at a young age. I think it was in 5th grade that a friend of mine showed me a Playboy magazine and let me borrow it one day after school. And I just remember that moment marked the start of a long struggle that would last for years. At that age, I didn't really understand the long-term impact that it would have. Only later would I learn from research and reading that porn rewires our brains for pleasure completely. In fact, our brains are neuroplastic, they're moldable. Just like a river carves a canyon, porn creates this deep channel in our brains. And really what it is, it's a quick path to pleasure. And what it does is it makes it actually difficult later in life when you have real intimacy with a real life person, the spouse that you marry. It's actually less satisfying because it's not as quick as the pathway of dopamine that's been carved into our brains. A long time ago, I read a book by Gary Wilson, who isn't even a Christian author. He's a neuroscientist, but he wrote a book called Your Brain on Porn. And it has this fascinating explanation, and it's summarized like this. The neurons that fire together, wire together. So when you watch porn, let's say on your phone, you be in the bedroom away from everybody else, what you actually are doing is rewiring your brain to seek pleasure on the phone in that specific setting. And what it will do is it will disrupt your real life because it won't feel as good because the dopamine rush isn't as quick. The Bible offers us some guidance on sexual purity, and it emphasizes that sex has been created to be enjoyed within the context of a covenant relationship for the purpose of intimacy, but also stability. And the way God designed sex was to create a lifelong, secure relationship that would provide security for children and future generations. And then later, Jesus would affirm marriage as this union between a man and a woman, saying that a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. And it's this clinging part that is both physical, biological, spiritual, and mental. And I think what happens with pornography is it comes in and disrupts this pattern of clinging together. So it offers a shortcut to the pleasure without the actual work required to be in a relationship. For example, when you're in a relationship, to get sexual pleasure, it involves a lot of things. You have to care for your spouse. You have to have kindness. You have to have care. You have to nurture the relationship. You have to make sure that you're both in a good place for it. And what happens with porn is it bypasses all of that, and all it focuses on physical pleasure. And then when you come into a relationship, sometimes that trains you to just want the physical part without the rest of it. And the response that I've seen is, if your spouse is tired or not in the mood, the reaction is disappointment and anger. In my view, sexuality is a major area where the devil actually attacks us. Scriptures warns us that the goal of Satan is to kill, steal, and destroy. And nothing ruins your life more than having an undisciplined sexuality that you cannot master. Because what happens is we can become slaves to our own desires. And with porn addiction, it starts to evolve. Something that you first look at for a while, then you get bored of, you look at something else. And then sometimes you bring those expectations into your relationships, and it's not healthy. It ruins the ability to find satisfaction in the person that you have. Sex isn't just physical, it's also spiritual. And no matter how much you tell yourself, it's okay, or you know what, it's just society's fault for giving us all of this stigma and quote unquote shame culture, that's to blame for me feeling bad about myself and my decisions. I think the reality is, if you remove all of those unwanted voices from your life, you still can't bluff your soul, which deep down is saying something here is incongruent with the way I have been designed. But the bigger issue, I think porn can be a gateway drug. Just like with any other substances, the thrill over time fades, and then you need more extreme content to achieve the same high. And there are two things that we need as a species to survive that we will never get tired of. It's food and sex. And the modern problem is we have infinite access to junk food and junk pleasure. For most of human history, we've hunted for food and grown it at a great cost. Now you can just walk in and buy GMO grown lab food that destroys and still have a lot of cravings for it. I think the same thing is with sex via pornography. We can bypass the process of courting and dating and working really hard to have a partner to then enjoy life with and to have sex with. Instead, we bypass all of that work. We can turn to a screen and look at pornography. And the author of this book talks about how pornography has even changed over the last 50 years. Even back in the day, if you had to look at it on a VHS tape or a magazine or some sort of medium, that would run out. At some point, the pages end. At some point, the DVD runs out of space. And so you still had to engage in real life. But what's happened recently is you have the biological necessity for food and sex, and you pair that with the infinity of the internet, and we've created a new problem that our species has never seen before. Right now, you can be sitting on your computer and have 50 tabs open looking at all sorts of content that will never, ever end. You can't get through it. There is no stop. The DVD no longer ends. And because of that, it's led to darker and more harmful content just to maintain the same level of dopamine high in our brains. There is hope, however. I think just as the brain can be wired for addiction, it can be rewired for holiness. I think there's strategies on two fronts, the physical and the spiritual. For the physical, I really like what Gary Wilson puts in his book. He says the first step is to give your brain a rest from all artificial stimulation for several months to shift your attention to real life. That just means cold turkey. Like if you just completely cut off all access to pornography, at first it's going to be hard. You're going to have withdrawals, but you're going to gain a few benefits. Number one, you're going to start to restore your sensitivity of your brain's reward circuitry so you can then start enjoying everyday pleasures. And number two, you're going to start to reestablish your willpower. He calls it the rebooting of your brain. And sometimes it can take a few months, or if you've been on this addiction path for a long time, it can sometimes take a few years. And you're going to have that urge to go back and look at porn because it's a shortcut to pleasure. But then after a while, you'll start to realize that other parts of your life are much more enjoyable. You need to free your brain circuitry from these pathways. And just like a canyon, if the river dries up and stops flowing over time and it overgrows with vegetation and new pathways are formed, we can form new pathways in our brain through just physical change in our habits. But number two, I think it's important to have a spiritual aspect to it as well. I think overcoming pornography has its benefits, like an increase in self-esteem, productivity, and quality of life, but we're not just physical beings. On the spiritual side, what has been very helpful for me is the passage found in 1 Corinthians 3:16. Paul says, "Do you not know that you yourself are God's temple and that the God's Spirit dwells within you?" One of the biggest claims of the gospel is this idea that my body, my choice, is no longer valid. After we receive Christ, we actually belong to Him. Our bodies are not to be used to just bring satisfaction for ourselves. They are now to be used to bring Him glory. So for me, a couple of spiritual practices that helped. One, I had an accountability friend, somebody who I trusted, and we would have a call or a coffee weekly, and we would share our struggles and where we had victories and where we didn't have victory. Number two, I really committed to a rule of life. But what that allowed me to do was to practice spiritual disciplines, where I would read the Bible, I would pray, and what I realized was at the end of the day, it's all about what you love. And so as I started to love God and His Word more, I started to be less interested in my addictions and all of my other sinful patterns from the past. And the subtle shift that happened was simply this. I still had temptation with pornography and lust, but I no longer liked it. I still struggled with it, but it saddened me every time I would lose a battle. Whereas before, I both liked it and did it. Now, as I grew closer to God, I still sometimes did it, but no longer liked it. It would create a tension And that was the first sign that I was on my way to renewal, that I was repenting. And over time, not only did I no longer like it, but it started to repulse me and I didn't want to do it at all. And here's the reality: as you begin your journey, you will have temptations. Absolutely. Will you have areas of failure? You bet. But sanctification, becoming holy, does not mean perfection. It means overall, as I get closer to God, the number of my failures decrease, and then there's grace to move forward. Think of a caterpillar. It's not a butterfly yet, but what's very important is if you look at its DNA, it has the same characteristics and markers of a butterfly. It's just in the process of becoming. Same thing with holiness. We may still look like we're struggling and crawling through the ground as we struggle with pornography and lust, but inside we do have the DNA of holiness. We are becoming free in Christ. So as the scriptures say, the righteous person can fall, but will get back up. If you've been struggling, get back up, pursue Jesus, and he will be your pathway to freedom. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content, and we'll see you in the next one.